Welcome to another episode of Full Tilt Podcast. And today we're chatting to Greg Johnson, who is Executive Vice President, the Americas, Asia Pacific for Cineflix Rights, which is one of the UK's biggest TV distributors. I think I've got that right, Greg. Welcome. We've known each other for a long time, so I've been looking forward to this interview. We get to chat, but we also get to talk about something that's super, super passionate for you. So let's get straight into it.
That sounds good. It's like we're sitting on my couch in LA having a glass of wine and
You are
just
sitting
chat.
on your lounge. Well, maybe not your lounge in LA, but it's good. So you've spent 3 decades at the top of the industry. Disney, ITV, BBC worldwide. You've lived and worked across Los Angeles, New York, London. But before all that, what was the young guy like that first walked into the industry? What was the version of the world you thought you were going to build at that stage of your career?
Oh, that's a good first question. It takes me way back. I think I fell into the industry. I started in the music industry and then moved over to television and movies. And I don't quite know how it first happened. But look, when I was at school, I wanted to be a pilot or an architect. And I realized I was not very good at physics, which, if you know about flying a plane, you need to know about inertia. And I wasn't very good at that.
I can't see you as a pilot. Just saying, I can't see you as a pilot. That's
I
not something.
was more art history and English. And I've been lucky enough that the career that I fell into is something that I was very passionate about. And not everyone always has that. So I feel very lucky about that. Like any good Australian, I decided to go traveling for 2 years when I was 19. It's like the rest of the world was out there, and I felt like I was so far away from where things were happening. So I did that, and I was lucky enough to get a job in music when I was in London and working in a pub on the weekends. So that sort of became the start. I didn't have any expectations, I don't think, when I was young and impressionable, but I had a really good time at the start.
Well, you were probably right at that time in the industry too, where that was I guess, the party time of the industry. Everyone talks about it. Like the entertainment industry was definitely full on of those sorts of things. So that's, I guess, what the next question's really, I'm really interested in understanding. So, like, global television is something that people watch, but I'm pretty sure that there's not really an understanding of how that industry really operates. And so what does it actually mean to do what you do? Like, what does a deal feel like when it lands in your office and you just know, hey, this is a really good deal? What does that look like? Does it have a frame?
Yeah, look, yes, it does. Firstly, distribution is a great part of media, and it is something that not a lot of people know or understand. It's, if people have a yearning to go into media, a lot of time it comes through university degrees in art history or cinema and that kind of stuff. And people see the creative side of the business of making shows, and distribution is the business end of that. It's, it takes content, assets, shows, whatever you want to call them, and it monetizes them around the world. That's changed over the time that I've been in it, but it's still essentially the profit making center of, the long tail of content. We call it that. That if you can find something that has longevity and you can window through different platforms at different times, you can make a lot of money. You think of something like Friends back in the day and how much, I think I read recently that each of the 6 leads still make about 20 million a year in residuals.
Wow, really? Even
That's
from
that's
that?
part of yeah, that's part of distribution, part of what the distribution teams at studios and different organizations do.
Wow, that's extraordinary. So I guess it's why even probably more today, why it's so compelling, because obviously the film industry is sort of changing, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And I know this next piece that I want to talk to you about is true from my own experience, but you've been described by your industry peers, and I know some of them, as a real straight shooter, someone who cares about value on both sides of the deal, someone who really genuinely invests in building relationships. From my experience, what industry you're in, you're very focused on building that real personal relationship. But the industry that you're in is brutally transactional. So it's kind of I don't know, there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of those two things. So I'm really interested to understand, in an industry particularly where your reputation is everything, but the industry demands a really transactional approach to how you operate within it. How have you maintained your own sense of who you are? How have you gone about building that reputation that I know is so important to you? And what would you refuse to compromise to protect your reputation?
A lot of questions in there. Look, I really value where I'm at in my career and what I know I'm good at, what I've learnt over the time, and what I bring to the table. You know, none of it was deliberate on my part, but I've kind of learned my strengths, and I've leaned into it. So someone that I was working with once said, the easiest job that you can have is one that you are passionate about and you lean into your strengths. You don't push against the weaknesses. It's,
Right.
you find your way there. And I think that's been really helpful for me. I love talking to people. I'm probably on the introvert scale, but very close. But I've learned
Yeah,
over the
I
years.
wouldn't have thought that of you at all. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that's how you see
It's
yourself,
on
as
the
someone
Myers-Briggs thing. It's
who
kind of, I'm on the middle, but
Right, right,
to the
right.
left just a little bit. And it's about where I get my energy. But I do need people around me, and I like talking to people. Put me in a room at a party by myself, it's a little harder, but in
Right.
business, when you know what you need to do, uh, that's served me really well. In every role that I've had, it has been about building relationships, and that's at all levels. That's with your clients, it's internally in big organizations, it's understanding how to work the system to not get what you want, because that sounds very cynical, but to end up with a result that works for everyone. And I think that's
Right.
that's really key for me in negotiations. You never want one side to feel like they've been screwed over. You want everyone to feel like they've had a win, and I don't think that changes anywhere. You also realize you need other people to help you get to the end goal, and that can be people that you're pitching shows to, who then need to go and sell it internally, because there's a lot of money involved. So it really is about relationships, being transparent, and I don't know. I think you said it to me last week. You said something about, like, what's the end game? Where do we need to get to? I like to cut through the crap as much as I can,
Right.
which I think again has served me well.
Well, I think it's also why we've been such great colleagues as well, because we're both very similar in that we have, but maybe that's the Australianness that we have a very low S meter. We can pick that, miles and miles away, and we're both pretty transparent. We don't really tolerate, that kind of, I don't know what's the word, superficial sort of stuff. But that just really intrigues me, because in your industry, it must be prolific, lack of transparency and the real superficiality of the industry. And yet you are so the opposite of that. So how do you protect the thing that you value most about your reputation in an industry that's pulling you to be something else? Is there something that you do, like, that you're really conscious of?
I actually don't think the industry has tried to pull me in a direction I'm not comfortable with. I think everyone has their own style. At the end of the day, in the jobs that I've done, you need to deliver, and
Right.
I've always delivered results. I've always loved having a P&L. It's it's
Yes.
it's there's there's
You'd be
there's no
amazed how many people have roles that don't even know what a P&L is. But anyway, that's
exactly.
a whole other different conversation.
It is, but I like having a P&L. I like, my brain works in having goals to hit and understand and measurements so yeah, I don't feel like I've been changed. I feel like I've found my own groove as I've grown to know myself more.
Yeah, well, is there one thing that you'd kind of refuse to compromise in any role?
Um, I if there's something I really don't believe in, that could be a problem for me. I am, it's part of my character about fairness. Fairness is something in my
Right.
life that is really important to me, and if I feel like that's not happening within a team or within an organization, that kind of stuff is something that I take really personally. Yeah, and look, and the other thing for me at this stage, at this point of where I am in my career, is the leadership element is really, really important to me. It's, I'm really, I've had a lot of different teams over the years in different regions, and I'm still in contact with many of them around the world, and just to see how well they've done or the little part that I've played in helping them get to the next stage of their career is what's really interesting to me at this stage. So
Well, that's awesome,
yeah,
and I can
I want to
imagine you would
continue with
have
that.
a pretty vast network, that's for sure. Okay, so back to this, extraordinary career that you've mapped out for yourself. You spent, from my memory, 9 years at Walt Disney as Vice President Distribution for Asia Pac. You were based in Sydney, and then I think you moved to Hong Kong. That's a really long time to be, particularly with one entertainment industry company. And it's a huge territory that you were responsible for. What did those years teach you about how content sort of can travel across cultures?
My time at the Walt Disney Company in Asia was such a highlight of my career to date. I loved working in a region that was so vast and different. It ranged from very sort of Western markets like Australia and New Zealand through to developing markets like Vietnam and India and China. And, I was young and had the opportunity to travel a huge amount and sell great TV shows to interesting people around the world. So it really was a pivotal point for me. It was a rebuilding phase for me. I'd come out of the music industry. I was 32. I had changed personal circumstances and was looking to rebuild a career in media. And I was really lucky that I was given that opportunity, and I took it and did well out of it. I think over my career, timing has been very fortuitous for me. And I've worked really hard, but I've made some decisions to work for companies that I knew were heading in a certain direction. And I think the Walt Disney Company at that stage was definitely that. Although at the time I just needed a job because I wasn't working. So
Well, I think it's also the result of your excellent karma that you've managed to attract such fantastic brands that you've ended up working for. So with that role in Asia, do you think there was some things that you needed to sort of relearn about, the cultural assumptions we often make about different parts of the world that are new or where we're sort of used to or comfortable? Was there anything that you sort of thought, actually, I got this completely wrong. I need to reshuffle the way I think about this?
look, I think as an Australian, Asia was on the doorstep. Hong Kong was the first international trip that I ever did. I do have an affinity with Asia, but yeah, when you're working in those markets, there is a lot of cultural differences and things that you need to understand and just work in with. Things happen in different ways in different places, and the culture can dictate. Japan is a very different culture to India, to Australia, and what you need to do to build relationships and to build trust. And it's the same with teams. Having a team in Asia across India and Hong Kong and Australia, and there's a lot of different ways that people work. And I've,
Right.
as I said earlier, I was Australian. I traveled around the world, and I've really always tried to soak up cultures and understand them.
Well, that's cool. There's a lot of really cool different cultures in Asia, that's for sure. So then
Yeah.
you moved to the BBC. You moved to New York, capital of the world, one of my favorite cities. But you
Mhm.
moved to a completely different genre of entertainment. So you moved to factual sales, which I think is documentaries in your language, and co-production specifically for the Americas. That's a really different creative culture from Disney's sort of epic scale to the BBC's different style of very, very serious editorial prestige and credentials. How did you navigate that change, and what do you think that factual TV does that drama can't?
Look, first of all, I think whether it was a Walt Disney Company or BBC, they're at the top of the game in what they do,
Yeah,
and they're really strong global brands, which I've always been attracted to. Like a
yeah.
brand that can manage to build a business around the world is, I always find interesting. Look, it was a change for me, but the mechanics of the business don't change. The reason that I moved to New York it was for a couple of reasons. They were mainly personal. It was around being closer to family, giving my son the opportunity to go to university, because working for these big corporations, I had seen the value of connections from great US universities, and I wanted him to have that option. I was lucky enough that my boss that hired me at Disney then moved to BBC Worldwide in London and oversaw global distribution for them. And when I said that I was looking to make a move to New York, he found an opportunity for me. It wasn't necessarily what I would have chosen for myself, but I learned so much there. I got to work with just amazing filmmakers. When you're on shows like Planet Earth and Frozen Planet, and you're pitching these shows from concept that are going to take 5 years to go out into the field and
Wow.
film
Yeah.
is really fascinating. And I have so much respect for all of those filmmakers that we were working with. It was really special at the time.
Yeah, well, it's a great brand. You're right. I love some of the BBC productions. So then you moved to ITV Studios. So for those, particularly those living in the United States that might be watching or listening, what's the difference? Because there's often a lot of sort of confusion around, is BBC part of ITV? Is ITV part of BBC? What's the difference between those two brands?
Okay, so ITV is the biggest British ad-supported network. BBC
Okay.
BBC is public service
Right.
broadcasting in the UK, but then their distribution sides were really global. So, as in me, like in the business, you don't want to only produce shows for yourself. That's great to
Right.
have. It's a fairly limited relationship that you can have. You need to make shows for other people. So I think a lot of the confusion would come that ITV Studios would make a lot of shows that aired on BBC, for
Right.
instance, and
Right.
BBC shows that might have aired on ITV or
Yeah,
Channel
of
4 or
course.
Channel
That makes
5.
sense. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
That
that
makes total.
that's the difference. ITV Studios at the time that I started was also under the leadership they had there, were really developing as an international studio. And you think of ITV as a UK network, but they're also a powerhouse global brand. They own The
Right.
Voice, which they
Right.
make in many
Yes.
territories. Love Island
Yeah.
is another one of their shows. So they do create shows all around the world. And that was one of the great things about my time at ITV was how diverse all the programming was. Whereas I'd come from BBC where I was only doing factual, I moved to
Right.
ITV where I was helping build, co-productions and financing for dramas, but also selling unscripted programming and factual programming. And it was really exciting to be to be
That's
working at the
fascinating. I
level.
don't think
So,
Yeah, I don't think that many people would realise that The Voice is owned by a production company like ITV. It's interesting, isn't it? It's sort of
yeah.
been absorbed into the ether by a lot of the Americanization of it because the American culture is so vast and so obviously so aligned with that sort of programming. I certainly never knew that. But at ITV, you did some extraordinary things. You doubled the size of the American distribution business, probably on the back of The Voice, given the scale of what they were doing. And you started with the Americas as your territories, and then over time you expanded to take on Europe and the Middle East, which is just absolutely massive. You also closed some deals for some of my most favourite programs. And I remember one in particular, you were on the set of Vanity Fair. I think we ended up speaking on the phone one day and you were telling me what you'd just been doing. And I was like, oh my goodness, it sounds so cool. So, and then you also did things like Victoria and Poldark, both extraordinary programs whose leads have gone on, their lead actors have gone on to be really superstars in their game now. So just for those people and sort of like for me too, just quietly, who are really obsessed about how this industry works or certainly fascinated by it, can you just walk us through an example of what do you do? Like how do you end up co-producing a show, for instance, with PBS or Amazon? I mean, it sounds so groovy and cool, even from a business perspective, let alone the audience perspective. So can you kind of give us an example that would show us just sort of what you do? Like, the basics. Does someone just ring you up and say, hey, I've got this great screenplay called Victoria? Or like what are you just lying in a hammock smoking a cigar and someone calls you and go, hey, we've got a show called Poldark, you should do it. How does it work?
A little more complicated than, than that. Talk about ITV as an example. So basically, ITV Studios is made up of a lot of smaller companies that they have either purchased through M&A or have built producers into their own companies, and those producers all develop different shows. One of the biggest producers within ITV Studios was a company called Mammoth Screen, and they made Vanity Fair and Poldark and Victoria and have made many great series since then. And so generally, it's the producer's job to get a first commission. In the distribution business that I work in, we work in deficit financing, basically, of how do we make a show work? And that comes from someone first wanting to commission the show and putting up a certain amount of money. In the
So when
UK,
you
there was
when you say deficit financing, what does that mean?
so distribution arms of companies generally need to put up a certain amount of money to purchase those rights that they can then
Right.
exploit for, hopefully the long tail of a very successful series. So the way that deficit financing works is generally, if we talk about a show that's commissioned in the UK by, let's say, ITV or BBC, they will
Right.
commission it. They will put up a certain fee for it, which, let's say for ease, is $1 million. 1 million
Right.
pounds. We'll go pounds. Then there's tax credits that go on top of that, depending on where you film, and that could be 20% of the budget. So you layer that on it, and then the rest of the money to get a show made. And if a show costs 3 or 4 million to make, and the commissioning broadcaster's putting in 25 or 30% of that, and then you're getting another 20% from tax credits, the rest of it needs to come from a distributor or pre-selling it to another partner that can get that financing. And that's what deficit financing is.
And the balance of that financing would come, and again, this is me as a complete novice. I know a little bit about the industry, but nothing to the degree that you do. So just clarify. So the balance of that finance would come primarily from a distribution network that knows they're going to be able to recover that investment from their on sale.
Yes, that's the
Okay.
hope. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen with it doesn't happen with everything. And some companies have a portfolio approach that, X amount of 10 shows will work and be profitable, and a couple may not be, but you're building a portfolio and library of content. So yeah,
Okay.
that's
Well,
how it
thank you for
works.
that.
And for a time, it was that period of, you hear a lot about peak TV and when there was
Right.
over 400 series being made and all that kind of stuff. That has changed now, but during that time was a really, really right period to do co-productions with shows, and there was a lot of success for a lot of people because there was a lot of money. You're talking about a time when Netflix was building
Right.
and you had all these new platforms. It wasn't about profit, it was about subscribers. It was all about bringing people in, and the amount of money that was spent really helped a lot of these shows get made. I think it's a little tougher these days to make that happen because the dynamics and the mechanics of what is a success has changed for platforms.
So would that be what do you think that leads, I think, probably to a really interesting question from my perspective. What do you think most people completely misunderstand about how deals are made? That they think it's just sort of some sort of wish list, or what do you think's the single biggest thing that people just get wrong?
When you talk about people, who do you mean people that
Well, I
are the
guess
influencers
people on
and
the
watch
outside,
shows, or just
obviously
people not
people
in
on
the
the outside
industry?
of the industry. Yeah, people on the outside.
I don't know. I don't actually know whether people care about the mechanics. They just see a
You're
show
probably right.
on. They see a show that they think they might like, and look. At the end of the day, if people are watching, if people are watching the shows, that's the success measure, and how they find them. I don't know that
I
they want to
think
know
that
how the sausage is made.
I think it's slightly different. Sorry, I'm probably terrible at explaining what I mean. What I think it is like the audience probably doesn't have an understanding of just how much money goes into it and how much risk there is. To you, the point you've just said earlier,
Yeah,
sometimes there's no money made back from a distributor, or it's a complete dud. So they've financed the balance of what's required to make a film. And the reason it's interesting to me is there's a lot of synergy here in how startups work, the startup
yeah,
ecosystem, because you can bet on a great program or you can bet on a great startup. It's totally up to the creatives in your case, and then whether or not the production is done well. And then that depends on the director, and that the stars that are in the show end up resonating, or, there's a whole
yeah,
bunch of stuff that is sort of like you're putting together. But in your industry, there's a whole chunk of financing that's dependent on the sale that hasn't even happened yet. And that's sort of very similar in startup landscape or ecosystem of some great founder has an idea and they've got to figure out and have, obviously there's systems and processes that are pretty standard that determine whether or not it's a good startup, which I think in your world there would be an ecosystem that if it doesn't exist, if it's a good producer or a bad producer, if it's a good production being run well or not run well. But I think people in the general population think that these things are just pulled out of huge budgets and people
yeah.
always make money and you're rolling up to the set in a Rolls Royce and you don't do anything except the cigar smoking thing. I don't even know where I've got that from. But anyway, it just seems to kind of be that whole sort of industry perception. So I
Probably from,
think
if you've seen on Hulu and Disney Plus, there's a show called Rivals about the TV industry in the '80s. If you've watched that, that's basically what you're
I'm
talking
taking
about. It's
notes. I'll be
it's what
having a
it's
look.
what it's worth a watch. Look, I think in the role of financing shows, it's taking calculated risks. And as I said, it's working across portfolios if you're able to do that and you have the luxury of doing that. If you're a much smaller company, the bets become bigger risks, I guess.
Right, of
Mm,
course.
And that's I think a reason why there's so much consolidation in the industry now, because companies need to become bigger and bigger and control more of the pipeline to have a piece of the pipeline.
Right.
But look, if with all of these shows, it is a lot like startups because with all these companies, if you're investing in something at the time that you might invest $8 million in a series, you might have a script. You don't have any talent. You may have some talent, but generally you won't have the actors signed up yet until you get the financing together. So it is working together between the financing side of it and the creative side of it to come up with something that gives you the best shot of success.
Yeah. And that, yeah, I think that's where the synergy lies. It's very, very similar. Just closing out what you did at ITV, though, because that was such a huge transition, I know, for your career, and it was such a big role. You even had to relocate to London from New York for the expanded role that included the Middle East on top of the Americas. So that was a really big ask of you personally. You basically uprooted your life, you moved to a new continent, you had a massively expanded role. What made you say yes to that? And what did it show you about yourself as a leader?
Yeah, look, I think it's innately in me that after 4 or 5 years, I'm like, okay, what's next? What do I need? What do I need to do? Where, what's going to keep me getting out of bed in the morning? And look, I think in 2017, when ITV asked me to move over to London to head the EMEA team, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, there was a couple of reasons that I did it, and there was also some reasons why I decided that I really wanted to keep the Americas as part of my remit, which wasn't what they asked me to do. They originally asked me to just come over and manage EMEA, but it was really important to me to keep my team together, and because so much was happening in the US at the time from the streamers, it was where a lot of the power was as well, and I wanted to be a part of that. So there was a selfish part of me maybe in that one that I wanted to keep that. Other reasons that I took the role, it's, you know, in my industry, there's not, probably in a lot of industries, there's probably not a lot of people as global executives that have actually worked in all the key regions. So I had 10 years experience in Asia Pacific. I had 7 years experience in the Americas, but I knew working for a British company that was based in Europe, that Europe was a very big part of that equation. And I wanted to be able to market myself as a truly global distribution executive. So that was probably the key reason why I decided to do it. The mechanics of moving a family and all that kind of stuff. I've done that before. It's never easy, but it's fine. The other reason was I've always worked for big organizations, but in satellite offices. And I'd never worked in a head office before. And I kind of felt like I needed that. And it was quite different to what I thought. I always say the best boss is a boss that's 8 hours away, but
That's funny.
yeah. But so that was a change for me, but it was good because I learned something else about, connection and being in head office. And I had a large team of about 60 people at the time. So it was a lot more management, and it did actually take me away a little bit from what I'm good at and what I love doing, which is sort of getting in and doing projects and finding people to do these projects with. So they were some of the reasons why I did it. I would have loved to have had a European passport, which was also in the back of my mind. It's like I could do 6 years
Right.
in Europe and get a European passport. Unfortunately, Brexit happened and then COVID happened while I was there. So, I ended up making some life decisions again that I wanted to be back in the US. So, yeah, so after 3 years, I gave up the EMEA role and moved back just to take over the Americas again.
Right. Okay. I think I remember that actually because COVID sort of anchored everyone back into a different way of thinking. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was very interesting times. And you certainly had an extraordinary career. So, talking about why we're even here is the podcast called Full Tilt. And that's primarily because I know from experience that when you're really inside a business and you're passionate about it, you really, it's almost an obsession. But there's fear involved. There's a whole range of shift and change. You've certainly explained a few of the ones that you've made in your career. What was your major pivot moment, if there was one? A moment in your career that forced you to really completely rethink how you were approaching your career and where you were heading?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about my media career, but it was actually just before the start of my career when I started to work for Disney that was probably two full tilt moments in a year. And you were a part of that as well back
I
then.
think that's when we
So
first met.
yeah, it was. So probably the first full tilt moment for me was the last 3 years that I was in the music industry. I was working for a Richard Branson company, and I had a wonderful job where I traveled to the UK or Europe or the US 1 week of every month for 3 years from Australia. It was for a company called V2. And the full tilt moment was probably after the 3 years, we were basically ran out of money. And spent a lot of money trying to sign up acts and things like that. And they decided to close down the business and license it on in Australia. So that's the first time I had to let go of an entire team of 20 odd people who were all relying on jobs. So that was an interesting time for me. But the full tilt moment was actually Richard came down to Australia before I left, and he was starting two other businesses at the time. He was starting Virgin Mobile in Australia and Virgin Australia, which was the airline that's still there today.
Right.
And he asked me if I wanted to join any of them, which was great that he valued what I did and that I could change industries. At the time, I was like, mobile phones? What's that got to do with music? How wrong I was. And actually from the airlines business, I didn't love the mechanics of building an airline and dealing with governments to get funded and all that kind of stuff. So that wasn't for me. But I do think one of those full tilt moments of, did I make the wrong decision? I don't think I did, because I've ended up with a wonderful career in media, but I didn't have the foresight at the time to think about how technology was changing so quickly and what it could be. So
Well,
that was
that's
that was
interesting though.
one, you
That's
know.
super interesting though, because I read, obviously you know this quite a bit, but one of Richard's hiring mantras is he hires the person, not their skill set. So he
Yeah.
hires personality. So that says a lot about obviously your whole persona and how you run your operation and how you show up, because I know that's one of the core elements. His philosophy is really, you can teach people the industry, you can't teach them the framework of how to or who to be when you show up, if you know what I mean, in his environment. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that is so true. And in my experience with him, there was he he gave opportunities to people that didn't necessarily have the skill set on paper, that were young, that were hungry, that whatever. And I think that's where he came from. And so it was an interesting time for that. I'll just finish off. The other time was after my short stint with your startup, Creative Airspace. So when that came to an end in Hong Kong, I was at a personal crossroads in my own life. I found myself without a job for the first time. I ended up being out of
right.
work 6 weeks before I did get the Disney role. But as a 32-year-old with a son and responsibilities, it was a really scary time, and I think that's actually informed my view. I will take calculated risks, but there is something about the career that I've had that has been very steady. And sometimes I wonder, it's like, could I have reached different heights if I'd been a bit more bold or made different decisions? And I think that probably came from that, but it's given me a stable and interesting career.
Well, and then you went on from those pivot points, you've had a few, if you think about it, from the different parts of the world you've moved. And now you've just recently, so in 2024, you've moved to take on a completely new role that was created at Cineflix. And you sort of landed back in television in a way, or probably at a time when streaming consolidation, the brutal changes in the advertising market for TV, or certainly for for free-to-air TV. What made you back yourself into this brand new position in an industry that's going through such transition?
Look, I've talked about timing as being good for most of my career, and this is probably the one exception. I love what I'm doing at Cineflix. I'm there because of an ex BBC colleague and boss who I really wanted to work with again. And it was an opportunity to work for a smaller company, very entrepreneurial, owned by a family rather than a company on the stock exchange, and just gave me something that after 11 years with ITV, it's like I was ready for change. I'm like, okay, I'm in my 50s. If I've got another 10 years of working, what do I want that to look like? I knew I could have the same career and the same job and do the same thing in a changing industry for the next 10 years. And, it's kind of like there's something else out there for me. So that's the reason that I made the move. I loved my time at ITV and I feel like I contributed to the business really well, but there just was that. What else is there? If I don't do this, what am I going to do? Become a bricklayer? Garden?
Yeah,
I don't.
I can't see you being a bricklayer. That's funny. Well, but you've gone back to having, an extraordinary breadth of territory. So you've got what now? North America, Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, and all of Asia. That's a huge, not only is it a huge cultural breadth, but there's, I would imagine, a lot of regulatory environments and really different content consumption. I mean, as an example, Spanish would be probably one of the biggest selling products you've got in the Americas, yet Spanish programming wouldn't have any appetite in Asia or Australia, or very, very little. How do
Yeah.
you navigate and hold all that together in your sort of breadth of portfolio?
Look, it's a lot less hours than other companies that I've worked for, but Cineflix is a company that has some really strong IP, and that's one thing that I've learned, regardless of where you are, and especially in the media environment that we're all in now, is IP is really important. Whether it's from books, whether it's from a long running series, and Cineflix, started the Property Brothers years ago. They have a show called Mayday Air Crash Investigations. It's been going for 27 years. And that, it's shows like that people come back to Cineflix for because of the IP, and that's what's valuable. As far as the breadth of the territory, I really wanted Asia Pacific because I wanted a reason. After 10 years of not being in that market, I wanted to reconnect with that. It's it's a
Right.
good way to get home and and see family as well. So that
That's
was that was a personal reason as well, that I really I'd enjoyed my time there, and although the markets have changed significantly, I just wanted to be a part of that again.
that's cool. Well, it's great to have you back in the region. So you've now, with that sort of history of your career profile we've just sort of talked through, you've worked for some of the most powerful studios in the world, and you've worked for one of the biggest producer distributors, which is ITV Studios, which is, hugely successful. And now you're working with an independent that's Cineflex, also of pretty serious prestige. Each of them operate with a completely different philosophy about what content is and how they create that content. What's that range taught you about the nature of storytelling itself, and what makes a show sort of cross borders, be popular no matter where? If you sort of take that crash investigator program you've just talked about, that's hugely popular globally. Like, what is there a thing? Is there sort of a one thing that makes a program popular no matter where it's made?
I think I think people are always chasing trends. The problem in this industry, because of the lag in how long it takes to get things commissioned and made and stuff, is that trend can change by the time you come out with that. So my view is it's really hard to follow a trend. We know in the industry that thrillers are probably more what people are looking for now than period dramas, but something will come along and tip that on its head. I would have said that a gay hockey drama from Canada would never sell around the world, and yet Heated Rivalry is a huge success everywhere. It's you never quite know. The one thing with shows and projects that I'm attracted to personally is when there's a singular voice and a singular vision. I find that if someone has something to say, whether they're writing a book or they're writing a screenplay or they're writing a TV series, if it comes from the heart and it really means something, that will deliver. So I just am normally more attuned to lean towards those storytellers that it's not an amalgam of a lot of people coming together to create something that they think will appeal. Something that's really personal and real, and it doesn't always sell. Before I left ITV, there was one show that I was extremely passionate about, and I won't go into the name of it or whatever, but it probably wasn't the most profitable show, but it was a really important show and it deserved to be seen. And that then comes through back to your early questions of what how do you sell a project, how do you be passionate about something, and it comes down to that for me.
Okay. So other than sort of the genre, and obviously there's different, I guess sometimes there's different things that, to just the exact point you've just made, that explode and are super popular, and sort of then everyone's scrambling to try and recreate that product in a slightly different way for their network. But these days particularly, it's the co-production team. So the different, I guess this is a combination of the production studio and the network that wasn't really there decades ago. Now you kind of can't do one without the other, which then kind of is also part of that whole co-financing component. And that's now increasingly central to how programs even get made. So in the past, a great story might have been shopped around. Now, if you don't have those two constructs at the very beginning of the equation, the chances of you probably even getting in the room to pitch your product are probably super slim. So you've been at the centre of architecting those business models for years, and I'm sure you've seen the change of them like really critically in the last sort of probably 5 since COVID. What does a really good, genuinely good production partnership look like?
Just with you saying all of that, I actually think that co-productions are going in the opposite direction at the moment,
Okay.
because the way platforms and streamers are, they want what they want and they're willing to pay for it if it makes sense for them. If you have a Netflix or an Apple or an Amazon and they're working and they have platforms that are global now, HBO Max, whatever happens with Paramount Plus, it's they're increasingly looking for shows that they can own around the world. So, and I think that's why one of the changes has happened, where that co-productions of finding someone that they have to have a creative partnership with, that they're investing a lot of money in, but less money than they would, has changed a little bit. I'd like to think that it will swing back a little bit. And I think
Right.
a great show can come from anywhere in the world.
Okay. And so do you think it's easier these days though, like say for instance, randomly, I mean, I know you, so I'm probably not a good example because I could just bring it to you, but say there was a random person sitting somewhere on their lounge in the world right now, listening to this with a great, or something they think's a great story. Is it
Yeah.
easier for them to now get that turned into a film or TV show now these days with the range of streaming, or than it was say 10 years ago? Or do you think the fundamentals still exist? So, what do you think?
The fundamentals of how programs come in, whether it's through agents or through different things in the industry, is still part of that. But what I would say is, if there's a writer, the fact that people can self-publish now and
Right.
get things out there, that's how a lot of shows started. Heated Rivalry was that it was fan fiction that started being self-published, that was then turned into books, which became IP that was valuable for a TV series. So I think from that perspective, it's easier to self-publish, to get your word out, to do all of that. There's still a lot of gatekeepers in the industry of ways to put things through, and it's the same from actors to writers to directors to whatever. Every single part of it is still part of a system that is still in place. So yeah, look,
Okay.
if I got an unsolicited script, I probably wouldn't look at it, because
Right.
you need to know that there's a chance that this will get, I might read it, but you need to know that there's a chance that something will get made.
Right. So the streaming giants then, they've obviously, in your view, fundamentally changed the leverage dynamics between distributors, producers and buyers, which is what we're sort of talking about now. And I guess we'd introduce at the beginning of that the creators. So that's someone who's come up with the concept or written the script. Then the distributor, the producer, the buyer. Are the streaming giants now the ones driving that? Whereas in the past, it would have been more the creative leads or the directors shopping it around or taking it into the different producers and networks that they were connected to?
Yeah, look, I think the streamers are a very, very large and important part of every distribution company or producer's game now. If you're not making shows for the streamers, you're probably not going to have a really strong business anymore. But I think there are still there are still opportunities out there to find the right home to tell stories in.
Tell the story.
And it's just about, from a distribution perspective, and from me, it's back to what we started with. It's about relationships, and if you've got the right thing to get into someone with, you can get into the streamers. You can get to, at the end of the day, if you've got good IP and it's a good program, and you can get someone to listen to the pitch,
Yeah.
that's kind of my job. I can't make people say yes to something.
Right.
I'd like to think that I could. I always say that a quick no is the second best answer, but it is about those relationships and being able to get in if you feel like you have a show that has a shot somewhere.
That's so true. A quick no is the second best answer. I love that. I'm going to use that going
Yeah.
forward if you don't mind. I
It,
won't let you
it's
trademark that
yours.
response.
I give it to
Great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So interesting, really interesting perspective. This is going to be a hard one, but obviously you're one of the few people I know on the planet that could answer this. What do you think the next 5 years looks like in
In
international
the
TV
world?
film? Ha!
No,
No, not
let's not.
well, please, not on an
We
age
have those
perspective for either of
We have
us.
those conversations. What's happening in politics? What's happening in the world? I
I
don't know.
know. Well, let's stay away from politics. That'll drive everyone over a cliff. Let's just talk about the industry as such, because I think we've all seen a huge shift in how we just, if you look at me as an example, I can't remember when I last went to the cinema. Honestly, it's been that long.
Yep.
So I don't consume programming the way that I used to, right? And so from your seat at sort of the epicenter of the industry, who's worked, in your words, in every global role, pretty much in every territory, at a very senior level in the film and television industry, what do you think's, the next sort of 5 years looks like to the industry? I know it's a crazy question, but just from your perspective, is there a sort of a winner and then a whole bunch of things that just slowly disappear? Is there kind of a couple of buckets that we're going to see more of and one's just going to evaporate? And, a bit like my cinema experience, it's just gone. I don't have it. I don't have one anymore.
Yep. Well, I think all of the above. I kind of feel like, when I saw the change in the music industry, when I got out of that, the music industry survived. It just had to change. And they came up with
Right.
new business models. And I think that's what media is going through at the moment. It's changing. You've seen it in independent cinema first, that market fell apart. You've got big tentpole movies now, like the Marvel stuff and Spider-Man or whatever. And then you've got some things like Backrooms that just launched this week. That's was a $10 million budget that's made 115 million in its first week. So, you have those outliers, but that bit in the middle has changed, and I think that's what's happening as well. The streamers are going to be and are going to be still greenlighting big expensive series that we all love to watch. And and I probably consume more TV now than I did. I'm with you. I don't go to the movies a lot anymore. I think COVID changed that for me more than
Right,
anything.
right,
Which is weird because I still love the movie experience, but I think technology in the household has also changed. So,
right.
when you've got an 85-inch TV and can sit there and watch a movie, you're like, do I pay this to go to the movies now, or in 30 days can I watch it or buy it for five, rent
Yeah,
it for $5 and watch it in the joy of my own home. So I
and
think,
have my own glass of wine and my own cheese platter and my own, you know,
yeah,
like shoulder rug as I continue to progress
you can
towards
probably
wheelchair
you can
level.
probably have that at cinemas. They might look at you a little strangely, but
Oh, that's true. That's true.
you
You have
can
to pay for that though.
but true. But I think it's just an evolution. I think, there is more and more consolidation, and that's happening with the studios, obviously, and everyone sort of has heard about Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Plus, and Netflix was going to buy them. I think that's happening. But I think even the next level of big distributors, whether it's ITV Studios or Banijay or All Three Media, they're all Banijay and All Three Media are consolidating at the moment. It's back to what I said
Right.
about having to have a bigger control of the pipeline to get in. So I think that's something that's here to stay for the industry. AI is having an increasing impact on the industry from production, which is another whole topic that you could get into, and what's possible now and how you make shows, to how people start in the industry and how AI is taking away a lot of that learning and things. So look, if nothing else, huge amount of change, but it will survive, and it will be in a form that, as long as they're still delivering stories to people that want to watch them, there'll
No,
still be
for
an industry there.
sure.
Yeah.
No, for sure. What's it like to be in the industry when you've touched on AI? And I know in your industry it's a little bit, I guess, really across the board, it's a little bit contentious, but I know it's had enormous impact on the production side. Just connections I know, lots of people are out of work. There's a big shift in, to your point, the infrastructure cost of building a film now, with things like animation and that whole piece of the industry now being really shredded by the ability for technology to do a lot of those functions. What's it like being it's sort of in the role that you're in now, right in the middle of this kind of transition?
Yeah, look, I'd say it's a learning phase. It's at the company that I'm at now, Cineflix. We're really starting to invest in AI across all levels of our business, from finance to contracts to how we produce series. And it's not about replacing people. It's just about how you can be. I think there's a lot of positives of AI. There's some other areas that need to work through, but I think anyone that puts their head in the sand and say they're not interested is going to be left behind.
Right.
And it's just about how you adapt it to your business and move with that technology.
Yeah, well,
So,
that's a great,
yeah,
certainly a great
I'm excited about it. I think there's lots of things. I just know personally how I'm using AI more effectively now is
Yeah, well, it's certainly changed. Certainly, I mean, obviously, the way every business operates, if you really look at it, there's some great things. But getting sort of just closing out the industry changes, is there anything, sort of all of the things that you've been through, and particularly now this huge technology shift? So you've experienced things across three continents. You've worked for iconic global names. Is there something specific around centers of power, where they fit in relationship building, how they may or may not move deals in the industry? Is there something that you kind of absolutely did not know was going to be a construct of the industry you're in now? I mean, obviously there's a whole lots of different functions you've learned along the way in terms of executing your role, but is there one intrinsic thing that you absolutely had no idea was going to exist in the industry or and in the career you're having now?
Oh. Look, yes, there's lots of things that I hadn't anticipated, but it's been an evolution over 20 or 30 years that you just adapt to in organizations very quickly. So I think being able to adapt is really key in business. Look, the underlying thing in the business that I have is trust, relationships, building all of that with people. There's still the human element of AI is not going to go and sell a show. They can tell you where it should go and all that kind of stuff, but there's still that very human
Right.
element of what we all do and how we connect with each other. And I think the media industry is a good way of is a great way of connecting people through stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's an evolution and that it will just continue.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in that too. I think if anything, it's polarizing the real need for the human connection, and that's something that I know we are all about, which is centering what we do as human beings around how we relate to each other. So I really see that, and I see it more and more. I think as being the real value proposition that's coming out of all of this, which is interesting in a kind of an ironic way. So we're going to get into the fun bit at the end of this. Not that the first part's hasn't been fun, but this I can see if I can catch you. This is we
All right.
end all of our podcasts with what we call our rapid fire. So this is 5 questions I'm going to fire at you and
Yep.
see how you go.
Mm-mm.
So the one show from any era, any territory that you are the most proud of having had a hand in putting in front of audiences.
Wow. There's been many. There's a show called Schitt's Creek that you might know that I
Oh,
was
what?
part
Major
of in
fan. You're a major fan.
2014, and there's just something about that show, and I think COVID really developed that it was heartwarming and it developed in such a beautiful way that show I think is a really special show. And the little part that I had in that uh, is something that is one of my proudest achievements. I think on the music industry side, it's working with an act, Jeff Buckley, who unfortunately didn't live up to the heavy expectations of such a great talent. But yeah, two things,
Yeah,
not one.
he was legendary, and so is Dan Levy and Schitt's Creek. Wow, I forgot that you had something to do with that. That's pretty epic. So,
Uh,
best piece of advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you, if you want to reveal?
Probably the best piece of advice is don't make decisions based on anger.
Ha! Great
Yeah,
piece.
that was from a former boss, but I won't go into the reasons behind it. But that's always stuck with me.
Yeah, I'll definitely acknowledge that. That's a great one. So, what's the one thing that keeps you up at night about where global TV is heading, if anything?
No, it doesn't keep me up at night.
Well, that's
Nothing keeps
great.
me up at night. It's you just deal with what's in front of you, but it doesn't.
That's great. And so, what does living full tilt mean to you personally?
Oh, you know what? Full tilt. Still being ambitious, managing work and personal life, I think becomes more at this stage of my life has become more and more important, and just being passionate about what I do in everything.
Well, that's great. That's certainly I try and live to that as well, as you well know. So, what's the what's the next chapter for you? What are you building towards, and what does the world not know about what you're about to do yet?
I really don't know. I've said to a few people this year, it feels like a year of change. It's the year of the fire horse, which is the first time in 60 years. And that if you read up on that, I've just got a feeling that what, things are changing. I'm not quite sure where they're landing yet, but I'm open
Well, there
for
you
what.
go. You've got a great role with it. Philosophy, one of those things that loved about you since I met you. So I'm super excited for you. Let's see where you end up or what you end up doing in the role that you're in already, which is super, super exciting. But listen, thanks for joining us today. It's been a really fantastic time to spend with you, and I've learned so much about you that I thought I knew, which
20
is,
years?
I know, which is extraordinary. But isn't it amazing that you have connections and relationships with people? Obviously, everyone does, but you often look at them through different filters, and we've never really, even though we've worked with each other before, and we've obviously had a long-term sort of friendship, but there's been a lot of distance in that. And I've never really, because I've never worked in, well, I've worked for Time Warner, but not in the capacity that you do. And so I've never known you through the lens of your industry. So how fantastic to, I feel like one of our listeners or our viewers learning about the industry from the inside out. So thank you for that. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to have a chat. And I hope that anyone that is listening takes away one thing from it.
I'm sure they will. There's lots of things in there to take away. But anyway, thanks again. And for all those watching,
Pleasure.
we'll see you with our next episode next week. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Thank you.